Webs, hit it!
The Bad Guys is a franchise which I've recently grown a real fondness for. It started out as a series of books created by Aaron Blabey which began in the mid-2010s, before eventually being adapted into a major DreamWorks film in 2022. And since then, DreamWorks have really been gunning for the Bad Guys to become one of their new, big, tentpole franchises. Now that many of their previous big franchises have finished their stories, or are being dragged out in ways that are pretty unpopular amongst fans, the studio is really looking for alternative franchises to bring new life to it, and this new life is coming in the form of various book adaptations, such as The Wild Robot, which is one of my personal favourite movies that's getting a sequel soon that I'm really hyped for, and it's also coming from The Bad Guys, which has already received its sequel film, as well as a full companion TV show, which is quite common for DreamWorks releases. And alongside that, the films have also received additional short films which are even played before some of the studio's other major releases in cinemas. And on the whole, DreamWorks really does seem to have faith in this franchise, and they clearly want it to be their next big thing. Which is why it's a shame that The Bad Guys 2 had a rather lukewarm box office return, but more on that later. But putting all that aside, generally speaking, I think that the average opinion on the Bad Guys franchise ranges from mixed to decently positive, I'd say. And the more that I personally think about the franchise, the more that I really enjoy it. In fact, I enjoy these movies so much that I've wanted to discuss my thoughts on them for around a year now. But unfortunately, because neither film got nominated for Best Animated Feature, I didn't get a chance to talk about them in my big ranking from last year. So instead, I felt like the best way to discuss my thoughts on these movies would be to cover them in a dedicated video on the franchise. However, just like with my Puss and Boots Retrospective from 2023, I felt like it would be way more fun to branch out from just the movies, and to instead cover everything, even the things which people don't really discuss all too much. So welcome to the Bad Guys Retrospective, a video where I review the two main films, as well as the shorts that came out alongside them, and all of the Netflix stuff, which includes 2 holiday specials and a 2-season TV show. Now, before anyone asks, I should clarify that the focus for this video is going to be exclusively on the DreamWorks stuff, not the original books. The simple reason for why I'm not covering the books is because there's quite a lot of them, I don't own most of them, and it will just make this already long video even longer. And honestly, it's the films that I mainly want to talk about anyway, as this is the version of the stories that I have a personal attachment to. Plus, in spite of the fact that these films are adaptations of the books, they do ultimately feel pretty different. I should say that I did still read the first 2 books for research purposes, and that was what made me realise that the films aren't exactly one-to-one adaptations, and are also just different interpretations of the same characters. And even then, not all of the characters are the same from the books to the movies. For example, in the books, the tarantula is a male character called Legs, yet in the films, they are a female character called Webs. And that's just one of many differences present, like how in the books, the bad guys try to be good from the very beginning, whereas in the films, their journey to becoming good is a lot more gradual. Whilst individual plot points are lovingly translated into the films, the overall package still feels very different, and that's ultimately why I don't think it's a big deal to separate out the mediums and to instead stick with the one that I'm just much more familiar with and have a stronger personal connection to. The books and the films are so different that I may as well just keep my thoughts separate. But with that being said, if a lot of you really want me to review the books, then I will do it. I just figured I'd still keep this video exclusively focused on the DreamWorks stuff. And with all of that clarified, let's not waste any more time and instead we'll jump straight into discussing my thoughts on the original film which started everything off. The Bad Guys released all the way back in 2022, which I know wasn't that long ago, but it feels like a completely different lifetime for me, and it follows the titular bad guys and their attempt to pull off a con where they look like they went good in order to get out of prison time, before eventually becoming good for real as they stop a villain who's even worse than they ever were. It's a simple story of redemption, but I think it effectively lays the foundations for these characters and this world really well, whilst also being very fun and stylish on its own merits. Now, I understand that this film isn't the most beloved installment in DreamWorks' back catalogue, as there are many people who found this film rather mediocre, and I can understand why they feel that way, as I do have a lot of issues with this film myself, which I'll go over in a bit, and I definitely don't think it's as good as the likes of Kung Fu Panda or How to Train Your Dragon and whatnot. And I can also definitely understand why it got overshadowed by a certain other DreamWorks movie which featured a wolf, which came out a few months later, as I think it's fair to say that that movie was a lot more popular with general audiences, myself included. It's my favourite movie after all. However, I don't personally care that this film isn't as good as my literal favourite movie of all time, as I still want to give it some appreciation because it's one that I really do enjoy a lot, from its characters to its presentation to its overall cool vibe. Whilst I'll concede that it does have the odd flaw here and there, that doesn't take away from how rewatchable and enjoyable I ultimately find this film. Now, I think the immediate thing that I need to praise here is the common thing which most people first bring up. The animation is very good in this. Now, obviously, on the surface level, it's got a unique style to it which is largely influenced by a lot of French and Japanese animation, and that definitely helps it to visually stand out from many other animated films. However, I feel like that's an overly simplistic point to make about why the visuals for this film ultimately worked. The reason for why I love the presentation for this film isn't just because it uses 2.5D style animation with action lines and additional cartoony expressions. Instead, I love the film's style because of how confident its direction is, and this can largely be owed to the work of Pierre Perifel, who's arguably the main reason for why the bad guys even got their chance to shine on our screens. He's a big fan of Blaby's original books, and he wanted to do something cool with these characters that he fell in love with, and his approach to adapt them to the big screen was to inject their cinematic adventure with so much life and energy within his direction. Perifel really wanted this film to feel like something more than just a regular animated action film, and so he imbued it with the style that you would get from so many other great crime capers, particularly heist films. Now, animated heist movies aren't all that common, but they do still exist, from the masterpiece that is Fantastic Mr. Fox to Get Squirrely. But the Bad Guys really makes an effort to explicitly lean into its heist homages and influences in order to give this film a unique but really cool style within its animation. More specifically, this film takes a lot of influence from the works of directors like Steven Soderbergh and Quentin Tarantino. In the case of Soderbergh, the whole film is dripping with the influences of the Ocean series, particularly through how it portrays the heist. They are elaborate grand plans with multiple characters all working together like a well-oiled machine, and the direction smoothly transitions between all of these roles in order to create a sequence that's constantly moving, yet remains easy to follow as we are still given a clear idea of what each character is up to. It's really fun to watch, and I loved all of the split screens and smooth transitions which were used to really emphasize the interconnectedness of the heist, particularly the dolphin heist near the start. That one was super cool to watch. But the film is still able to stand out on its own beyond its influences by blending the sophistication of this well-planned heist with plenty of silly cartoony moments, like Piranha popping out of the toilet to attack a guard and Snake shedding his skin in order to lose his disguise. It's a pretty fun mix, but it never loses the cool factor that also made the Ocean's movies so great to watch. But it never feels like a parody either, and instead it just adopts a similar style, yet mixes it with the limitless comedic possibilities that animation can bring, in order to give us sequences that feel fresh and fun. Oh, and the film also makes a George Clooney reference, which only further draws parallels to the Ocean's movies. So yeah, those are all the influences of Soderbergh, but the Tarantino parallels are arguably even more apparent. These influences can once again be found within the vibe of the film through both the overall coolness factor, as well as through the style of dialogue that can be found throughout. But it can also be seen more overtly, as the credits feel very much like the credits for a Tarantino movie, mostly thanks to the yellow text. And the opening scene for this movie is literally a recreation of the opening scene of Pulp Fiction. Now, some may find this homage a little bit cringy, as Pulp Fiction is a very over-referenced movie, but personally, the visual homage isn't too in your face for me, as it's literally the background of the scene, so I don't mind its inclusion too much. Plus, for as much as I hate him as a person, I do love a lot of Tarantino's films, so seeing references to stuff like this naturally makes me laugh. Plus, I also think it's really funny to see a family movie make reference to a film as explicitly adult as Pulp Fiction within just its first few seconds. But I think this homage also effectively highlights the film's unique identity, as it's willing to implement elements from famous crime films as a way to make the genre of the film more immediately clear to the audience, before then spending the rest of its runtime subverting these expected genre elements with the sillier aspects of the film. Once again, I'm reminded of a phrase that the filmmakers have used to describe this film many times. It's sophisticated and stupid. It has the sophistication of classic crime capers, but it also has stupid funny moments, and I think that's what gives the film its own unique identity, even when putting the intertextual references aside. It doesn't require you to be overly familiar with the heist genre to be able to get into it. In fact, I think it works pretty well as an introduction to the genre, but when it can remind its audience of other similar films, it is able to use that familiarity as a way to highlight what it does different. Plus, those scenes which do harken back to the likes of Ocean's 11 and Pulp Fiction are still really great scenes on their own. Even when divorced from its heist movie influences, the dolphin heist is still an exciting, well-crafted sequence which gives all the characters a chance to shine, and the opening scene is still a fantastic way to immediately set up Wolfensteig's characters. Also, here's a fun fact for you all, this opening Pulp Fiction shot is actually the longest piece of unbroken CG animation to be present within a DreamWorks movie, as it goes on for around 2 minutes without cutting, which is very impressive. Even the opening to Pulp Fiction had cuts to it, yet this film doesn't. But I think that this was a great creative choice, as it really allowed the audience to truly focus all of their attention on Wolf and Snake right off the bat. You immediately get an idea of what the characters are like, with Wolf being very well spoken and enthusiastic, while Snake is cynical over his birthday, and you also get a very clear idea of what the friendship between these two is like, as the dialogue between them is very funny, yet still quite genuine, and it effectively highlights how close the pair are, as it honestly does feel a lot like a comedically enhanced version of the kinds of conversations that I have with my close friends. And I think it was important to get this friendship right, as Wolf and Snake's relationship becomes one of the core pieces of emotion for this film moving forward, as their friendship is tested and eventually brought back together by the end. I don't think the rest of this film would work anywhere near as well if we didn't buy the bad guys as friends, and I think that the whole opening 10 minutes does a great job at establishing their overall dynamic and banter. And this takes me on to one of the biggest reasons for why I love this film. Put simply, I think that the titular bad guys are incredibly lovable and fun characters to follow. They may be criminals, but it's hard not to like them when they are this entertaining to watch. Each bad guy individually stands out from one another, as they all bring their own unique energy to the team. And as a group, they have a brilliant dynamic, and their banter and the way they react to one another contributes massively to a lot of the comedy of this film. But I also think that there's many great parts of the film where you can see each of their individual personalities shine brightly. Wolf always tries to maintain a level-headed and cool George Clooney-esque charm, but when things don't go his way, he bumbles around in a humorous fashion. But still, he's pretty well spoken, as I mentioned earlier, and this personality contrasts well with the rest of the team that consists of a cynical, snarky Snake, the chaotic gremlin that is Piranha, and the over-the-top method actor that is Shark. It can be argued that Wolf is probably closest in personality to Miss Tarantula, aka Webbs, which is the name I'll refer to her as from now on, yet even then, Webbs is arguably smarter and more level-headed than Wolf, so there's still a clear difference between these two characters. And whilst Wolf is the protagonist who gets the most focus in the narrative, everyone else still gets a chance to truly shine comedically, which thus makes them all feel memorable. If I had to pick a favourite moment from all these guys, Webbs was an absolute badass in the scene where she hacked through the whoopust, Snake's inability to contain himself amongst the guinea pigs led to a ridiculous moment which I couldn't help but laugh at, Piranha has some killer vocals which are shown off the best in the gala scene where he belts out the original song Good Tonight, and trust me, I will glaze this scene a lot more later. And as for Shark, it's honestly hard for me to pick just one moment that I love, as this guy is a comedic riot. He's full of so much energy, and the different characters he plays gives him so much comedic variety, and it generally led to a lot of my biggest laughs from the film. I'm having a baby! Yeah, Shark is probably the funniest of the main five for me. Although, whilst these characters are pretty great on their own, I think it's worth saying that the voice actors are a major reason for why they work so well in my eyes. Mark Maron has a dryness to his sense of humour which fits Snake's personality perfectly, and Anthony Ramos and Craig Robinson both have the necessary energy that's required for both Piranha and Shark respectively. Oh, and also, speaking as a Brooklyn Nine-Nine fan, I love hearing the infamous Pontiac Bandit play another criminal here. And then there's Awkwafina, who, I'm just gonna say it, I think she's pretty good in these movies. Yes, I know she's one of the most hated voice actors in animation at the moment, and yes, I will agree that she can be bad, and I wish she wasn't in everything, but I still think she works well as Webbs. She captures the youthful energy of the character well, and she has a great dynamic with the rest of the cast, which I think was the most important thing for any one of the Bad Guys actors to have, as the group dynamic is arguably the most important part. But I'd say that one major reason for why this group dynamic works so well is thanks to Wolf working well as an anchor for the group, and Wolf only works so well thanks to Sam Rockwell, who was just perfectly cast. Now, I love Sam Rockwell as an actor. I think he's a joy to watch, and his voice is so nice to listen to, and so he was a natural fit for voice acting. And in this case, I genuinely can't picture anyone else besides him in this part. Wolf is a character that feels very tied to Rockwell's own mannerisms, whilst also still allowing him to be a bit silly with his performance, and his comedic timing throughout is spot on. Yet in spite of this silliness, Rockwell is still able to remain suave, cool, and really charming. So yeah, I thought that the voice actors were excellent across the board here, and the character animators obviously did a fantastic job at bringing the visual mannerisms of these guys to life. These characters are all great on their own, and their group dynamic is able to make even the simple scenes really effective, and the fun energy that they bring helps you to instantly like them even in spite of the fact that they are all criminals. And this likability is important as it's exactly why you want to see them improve and eventually become good by the end of the film. So yeah, the main characters are one of the best parts of this film overall. However, I equally think that some aspects of their overall character journeys were a little bit tired and cliche here, and this is arguably one of my biggest issues with the film as a whole. For as inventive as the film is with its presentation and its implementation of heist tropes, many parts of the narrative admittedly felt rather standard, and I think this is likely the main reason for why a lot of people didn't care much for this movie. The cool style of the film and the funny character banter can only get you so far, and I can understand why some people didn't get much out of the film beyond that, as the story and themes really aren't anything all that stand out in comparison to many other family films. The story of redemption is strong here in my opinion, and I'll go over why I think the thematic elements of the film work well, but it can still seem rather cliche that the main theme for this film is as simple as, be good people. But like I said, I think it does still work well in execution. However, I honestly still can't get behind some of the cliche tropes that are present within the character drama in the final act. Like, this film has the whole main characters split up and are all sad before reuniting again in the climax shtick, and it isn't done in a particularly unique or subversive way. It's just the same emotional scene we've seen a million times in other animated films, and I couldn't help but roll my eyes by this point in the movie, especially during the scene on the beach. Now, I can understand why Snake is angry in this scene, and I like the callback that he makes to the birthday conversation at the start of the film, but I still can't help but feel like this drama is really forced in, especially when all the other characters join Snake in his moping. Like, it's not an awful scene or anything, I have seen worse, but its standard plot clashes so much with how unique the presentation for the rest of this film was. And whilst this emotional beat felt a little bit half-baked, others really could have been expanded upon further in my eyes, particularly the climax where it looks like Snake betrayed the gang to work for Marmalade instead. First of all, on first viewing, I really thought that Snake's betrayal felt rather forced in, as in spite of his rage at Wolf, he didn't seem like the kind of guy to suddenly fall so far as to work for Marmalade. But I did eventually take back that criticism after learning that Snake was only playing Marmalade and was actually on Wolf's side the whole time. Therefore, this twist helped to improve this part of the movie as it just fit much better. And it also led to a really sick moment when the switcheroo was revealed, with this scene once again feeling very reminiscent to the final twist of Ocean's 11. However, whilst this twist worked well in the long term, I still wish we got to see more of the emotional impact that Snake's supposed betrayal had on Wolf and the other guys. They don't know that Snake is double-crossing Marmalade within these scenes, they genuinely think that their best friend has betrayed them, yet we don't get to feel the emotions that Wolf should be feeling in this moment, largely because there's so many action scenes which follow on soon after, which are still fun to watch, don't get me wrong, but we lose some of the drama as a result of them. Now to be fair, we do still get some emotion within this ending, as Wolf and the others eventually decide to prioritise saving their friend over returning the meteor, and I think that leads to a really sweet moment with the crew where they're all reunited. But I equally think that this moment would have hit a lot harder if we got a greater idea of how devastated Wolf actually felt after Snake's betrayal, as it would have made his determination to bring his friend back to the light all the more admirable. But whatever, that's quite a minor nitpick. I still think that the overall emotions in the climax work well, and I like the idea that the gang's friendship is more important to them than any kind of police pardon. Their bond is the core of the movie, as I said before, and I do think that the climax really helps to highlight that fact. Although, whilst I'm on the topic of talking about parts of this movie which aren't all that amazing, I may as well say that I think that Professor Marmalade is just an okay villain, and he really isn't anything all that special. I mean, first of all, he's a very predictable twist villain, even for those who haven't read the books, as I think it's obvious to literally anyone who's watching that he's evil. I'm just grateful that they revealed the twist halfway through and they didn't make it a final gotcha, as that would have been really annoying. Plus, this earlier reveal gave him much more time to be evil. But even then, whilst he is a fun enough antagonist, he doesn't do anything all that memorable or menacing. Like, yeah, he does have a guinea pig army which adds a lot to the stakes of the climax, but as a character, he's still a little bit hard to fully take seriously. Although, what he lacks in menace, he more than makes up for in silliness. I love how over the top his goodness is portrayed, he looks so stupid when he tries to be menacing, and Richard Ayoade's performance is the perfect blend between slightly annoying, smarmy, and absolutely hilarious. Richard Ayoade is a comedian I've loved for years, by the way, so I think it's only natural that I enjoyed hearing him here. So yeah, whilst I think that Marmalade isn't a standout DreamWorks villain, and he definitely isn't as great as the main 5 characters, he's still a fun enough presence who served his role pretty well, I'd say. However, the other side character who I need to discuss is a different matter entirely, as not only is she my favourite of the side characters, but she's also my favourite character of this franchise, period. Anyone who knows me knows exactly how I feel about this character, but for those who don't, I'll make things immediately clear to you. Diane Foxington is not only my favourite character that I'll be discussing within this video, but she's also one of my favourite characters, period. She's a character who I've been drawn to for many reasons, and she enhances the film so much, whilst also leaving a strong impact on me, personally. But I'll start by discussing why I love her as a character on her own merits. First of all, I think she is just so freaking cool. The moment when we first see her with the Crimson Paw gear as she swoops down to take out all the guards was just so badass. That's the only word I can use to describe it. Just don't question why none of the guards told anyone that the governor was the Crimson Paw after she very explicitly revealed herself right in front of them. Yeah, this is definitely a plot hole to be sure, but it's one that you can very easily ignore, I'd say. And after this scene, she just continues to get cooler and cooler, especially after we see a fox cave with all the gadgets, and then she gets on a motorbike and chases down the trucks with webs, and oh man, I just wish I could be a tenth as cool as her. But she's more than just a cool action girl, and she's still great to watch even when we initially only knew her as the governor at the start, as it was cool to see her act as a mentor for the bad guys rather than an antagonist, which is arguably what she was initially set up as. Plus, she's still really funny and great to watch at this point in the film. I love the part where she calls out the bad guys for their incompetence as criminals, speaking from experience obviously, and I also love how much she completely sees right through Wolf's George Clooney-like charm. She's arguably the perfect foil to Wolf and was the first one to really undermine him and put him in his place, yet in a way that was really funny and oftentimes pretty caring. And some of her lines really do crack me up.
I can't miss a photo op with the governor in a pile of garbage.
Oh, Mr. Poodleton, you're too hard on yourself.
Hey.
But she's also a really fascinating character to follow, especially on rewatches. I think there's a lot of great foreshadowing to the fact that she's a Crimson Paw, like through the aforementioned scene where she criticizes the bad guys based on her own experience, and I also like how her personal redemption shaped her feelings for Wolf, and it ultimately explained why she was rooting for him. Whilst it's obviously great to see her get involved with the action, because she's literally the coolest character ever, I think this moment hits a lot harder because we already knew that Governor Foxington cared for these characters, so it became even more satisfying to see Diane make an active effort to help them. Plus, after revealing her true self, this is where her fantastic banter with Wolf really goes up to the next level, and we get to see a more flirtatious side, which gets further expanded upon in a later installment. And once again, the performances add a lot, with zazzy beats matching the coolness of the character within a performance, whilst also having great chemistry with Sam Rockwell. Fun fact, these two actors also star together in Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die. So that's pretty fun. So yeah, I love Diane, as I think she's a fascinating character who rewards many rewatches. But she's also consistently really funny, she has a great dynamic with Wolf, and she is just so damn cool. And she's also one of the most beautiful characters I've ever seen. What? Who said that? Oh, who am I kidding? Yes, this furry thinks that Diane is hot. What of it? That's not exactly an uncommon opinion, is it? Hell, that's a statement which can probably be said for every character in this movie. Just check Letterboxd for proof. I mean, they aren't called the bad guys for nothing.
Awooga!
Okay, I promise that's the only awooga joke I'll do for this video. I may as well use it to cover all the characters at once, otherwise we'll be here all day. But anyway, now that I've explained why I love Diane as a character, I should also probably mention that the reason for why she's had a personal impact on me is because she has inspired a lot of my own creative works. And you are in fact looking at an example of one of them. As many of you may have realised, the art style that I opted to use when designing my cartoon avatar was heavily inspired by the art style for the Bad Guys films, as I just liked how simple yet expressive it was. I especially took inspiration from the eyes, with the big white circles and the smaller pupils. But my influences from Diane went a step further than that. Not only did I also give my Sona noticeable eyelashes similar to Diane's, but she also served as the main basis for the rest of the design as well. Because both her and my Sona are foxes and I loved her character design so much, it was only natural that she would serve as a big inspiration. And if you look for the similarities, you'll find them everywhere. The eye colour is the same, the rounded nose is the same, and I even tried to make the ears point upwards just like her, which contrasts with other Fox characters I was inspired by like Nick Wilde, whose ears were a bit more pointed back. I don't know, I just thought that Diane's ears looked cute, and so I tried to replicate them the best I can. Obviously, I'm not a professional artist, and I'm not going to pretend that my avatar is a masterpiece, especially when so much of it is directly based off of another character, but I nonetheless loved having Diane Foxington serve as a reliable base of inspiration who helped me to become more creative and give this channel a more unique identity with an original character. And hell, she also went one step further and inspired a completely different character of mine. All I'll say about this character at the moment is that they are a cat burglar who's also a cat. Yet despite being a cat, this initial design was very explicitly modelled off of Diane as the Crimson Paw. What can I say? It all comes back to her. She's just the peak character in my eyes. So much so that I even have a short film idea which follows a character who's honestly very similar to Diane in a lot of ways. But I will try to make this character more unique before I take this story any further. So yeah, Diane has had a big impact on me creatively, and that's only enhanced my love for her as a character. She was already great in my mind, but after the impact she's had on me, she's arguably one of my favourite characters out there, and she helps to make these films even more entertaining and interesting. Speaking of which, I think that the deeper complexities of Diane's character ties in nicely to the overall themes of the film, and that's what I want to discuss next. Now, I said before that the main theme of going good isn't anything all that mind-blowing here, but I nonetheless still think that it works well in execution. And the reason for why it works is because the film focuses less on the traditional definition of going good, which relates to someone following the rules and whatnot, and instead it draws more attention to the personal impacts of going good. We follow a group of individuals who initially don't follow the rules, not because they are genuinely malicious, but more so because they felt rejected by a society who saw them as monsters. Speaking of which, I think it's clever to have the bad guys consist of animals who are stereotypically portrayed as villains in stories or are common animal phobias amongst many people, as that helps to really reinforce this idea. Because they've been perceived as bad for their entire lives, they eventually decided to just embrace it, and this film shines a direct spotlight on how stereotyping can lead to people becoming criminals. But it also highlights the importance of personal growth in spite of that. As we see these characters become more good, they begin to care more for one another, which is most evident in the scene where Snake selflessly gives up one of his push pops to Shark in order to cheer him up, which thus helps to make the situation better for everyone. Snake's simple actions weren't so good that they saved the world, but it made his friend happy, and that was what was more important. And Snake realised this importance and subsequently felt good about his actions, and that's what helped him to change. And to go alongside this, Wolf's arc throughout the film doesn't consist of him going from a criminal to a perfect citizen. Rather, it's all about him going from a slightly cocky and egotistical crook to a genuine friend who will risk everything to make sure that Snake can be with him. Plus, he also does some other good things which make him feel better about himself, and that helps him to deal with his long-standing insecurities. Whilst this film does show us the issues that societal stereotyping can cause, it also shows us how important it is for the individual to make the change to grow, rather than acting out and feeding in to the stereotypes. It doesn't matter what others think of you, stereotypes will be stereotypes. What matters is that you make the effort to do the right thing, no matter how small your actions are, and you'll subsequently feel much better about yourself for doing it. And in the end, your good actions will find a way to come back to you eventually, and will thus make your life that little bit brighter, whether it's through finding new friends and connections, or maintaining old ones thanks to your kindness and decency towards others. You are far more likely to find yourself in the world when you are much more open and friendly to the possibilities and environments around you. And it doesn't matter if someone looks down on you, as if you put in that effort to ensure that you don't feel the same way about yourself, you're far more likely to find those who do in fact care for you for who you really are. Again, this is a simple idea to tell to an audience, particularly a largely kid audience, and it's pretty obvious to most of us that crime doesn't pay and you're more likely to feel satisfied in life if you make that effort to be decent, but I still think it was satisfying to watch a character like Wolf go through that change gradually over the film. Although I do still respect this film for nonetheless showing the bad guys getting arrested at the end. Whilst they have grown massively, they still committed crimes in the first place, and crime doesn't pay, and it's important to show that fact to a family audience. But it doesn't undercut the emotional impact of these character arcs. And these arcs also nicely parallel Diane's story and how she used to be the best thief, but stopped after realising that this life didn't satisfy her. All it did was perpetuate stereotypes about foxes. She eventually realised that she was only running from this prejudice, rather than carving her own path to prove these people wrong. And that new path became far more productive and satisfying for her, and that allowed her to put in the effort to become the only politician that I respect alongside Count Vinface. And I'd say that this overall idea of personal growth leading to a more beneficial existence can best be seen within the aforementioned gala scene, where Wolf finally feels like he's part of a wider community. After putting in genuine effort to save a cat, remember he didn't know he was being filmed at the time so his good action was real, he finally gets the chance to carve his own destiny separate from the stereotypes. He's very clearly grown because he put in the effort to be good, and he feels good as a result, and that's just really satisfying to see. And it also makes for a strong contrast with the tempting criminal past that's still oh so present within his life. It's a great piece of interpersonal conflict which enhances the overall themes of the film really well. But beyond that, I think that the gala scene is probably my favourite scene from the whole movie. The character moments are compelling, the Good Tonight song that Piranha performs is amazing, as I said before, and the whole scene is just so damn cool to watch. It's funny, I love seeing the heist happening in the background, and the visuals are electric as we get to see Wolf and Diane dance together in a moment that's truly breathtaking. This was definitely the scene which made me ship these two together, by the way, just in case you were curious. But there are also still many other great scenes within this film as well, like the heist scenes, to the car chases at the start and end, to every scene with Diane, and all of these moments are enhanced by the amazing visual style that I discussed earlier. Oh, and because I haven't mentioned this yet, Daniel Pemberton's score for this film absolutely slaps. It gives every action scene this extra punch, and the soundtrack as a whole fits the crime style of the film wonderfully. I think it definitely helps that Pemberton also did the soundtrack for Ocean's 8, which thus meant they had experience with a film like this, and so felt like the natural fit. So yeah, the music throughout slaps, and that, alongside the animation, makes this a brilliant watch on a technical level. But I do still love the overall movie beyond that. And with that point made, I think it's about time that I finally wrap up all of my thoughts. Overall, The Bad Guys isn't a perfect movie. It has some annoying cliches, Marmalade isn't the greatest villain ever, and parts of the narrative don't stand out all that much to me. Plus, the humour can be a little bit hit and miss at points. Whilst there's definitely plenty of great jokes and moments of character banter, and I can safely say that I laughed out loud a lot, some jokes just didn't really do it for me. I mean, I'm not personally the biggest fan of fart jokes, so those moments with Piranha don't exactly do much for me. I know it's an element of the books, but I still don't like it all that much here. However, for the most part, I can ignore these flaws as I have such a good time with this film. I love the characters, especially Diane, I love the vibe, I love the presentation, and on the whole, this is one of the most entertaining and rewatchable DreamWorks films for me. It's always a joy to return to, and part of the reason for why I did this retrospective in the first place is because I knew it would give me an excuse to rewatch this film and talk about it in more detail, which thus meant that I got to spend more time in this world as a result. The Bad Guys is just a movie which brings me a lot of joy, and spoiler alert, I think that the sequel maintains this joy really well. But before I talk about that film, I first want to discuss some of the other, lesser discussed pieces of Bad Guys media that's out there. I may be going out of order on both chronology and release day, but I personally felt like it was best to bookend this video with my thoughts on the movies, which is the main thing I'm passionate to talk about, and then spend the middle of this video talking about the stuff which is generally less popular, I'd say. Although, in spite of them being less popular and well known, I still think there's some gems here, and that includes the next thing that I'm going to discuss. Maraschino Ruby is a short film which came bundled with the first Bad Guys movie on physical media, such as my DVD of the film. I don't have the Blu-ray sadly. Now, these kinds of bonus mini-movies are a pretty common sight to see within physical media releases of a lot of mainstream animated movies, and they are a pretty fun addition to have alongside the film that you've just seen. Now, I've already reviewed one of these shorts before, that being the Trident which came bundled alongside Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, and that was honestly a really good one. And I'd say that Maraschino Ruby is also a fun little add-on. It's very short, at only around 3 minutes long, but it's got a lot going on within that short runtime. The basic plot is that the chief of police wants to trap the bad guys by tempting them to steal a fake ruby. She calls them stupid twice within the newspaper in the hopes that this will be able to tempt them into committing another crime so that she can catch them. But the gang are actually already held up because Snake allegedly stole a push pop. But they're eventually able to get out of trouble thanks to Shark's lawyer skills, and they even pull an Uno reverse card on the chief by mentioning that her goal of entrapment is actually a crime. So in the end, the only one who got in trouble was the chief of police. So yeah, as I said, there's a lot going on within this show, with there being plenty of mini twists present throughout, and the final twist that Wolf and the gang broke into the museum just to swap the fake ruby with a real one was a pretty fun reveal. However, I'll admit that because there's so much going on within the short runtime, things can admittedly be a little bit confusing on first watch as there's a lot to keep track of and things do go by pretty fast. I definitely think it would have been way easier to follow if things were just a little bit slower. But at the same time, this short was probably designed to be super short as it didn't have the time or resources required to make anything longer, as it's not part of the actual movie. So I can understand why there wasn't a desire to spend too much time on unnecessary details. It's not trying to be a masterpiece short after all, it's just meant to be a fun little add-on to the main film. And I think that as a fun little add-on, it works really well. I got a good amount of laughs out of it, particularly from the chief being called out for her dodgy actions, and Shark as the lawyer is pretty damn peak. Also, here's a funny story. I actually saw people making Better Call Saul memes out of this scene years ago, before I even watched the main movie, and that meant that I was rather confused by the fact that I never saw Lawyer Shark within the film itself. For the longest time, I just assumed that this moment came from a deleted scene, but nope, it turns out it was in this short all along, and it was great to finally see this moment for myself after all these years, as it is a pretty funny scene. Hi, I'm Shark Goodman. Did you know you have rights? The Constitution says you do. And alongside the humour, the animation still looks really cool here. Despite being a glorified bonus feature, there was still a clear amount of effort put in to try and get the style of the short to match the film, and I really appreciate that approach. Furthermore, unlike the Trident, all of the original cast were present for the short, which was pretty nice to hear. So all in all, Maraschino Ruby is a fun little add-on. It can be a little bit fast-paced and confusing on first viewing, but after a while it started to make a bit more sense to me, and now I can just enjoy it as this fun, extra, breezy watch. It looks nice, it's pretty funny, and it's a very solid DVD extra. And I also quite like the continuity that's present within this short, as it features the black card with the yellow stripe that Diane gave the team at the end of the original movie, after the main card was destroyed, and that really helps to clarify that this short does indeed take place after the events of the main film. And obviously, Officer Bob's remarks about the bad guys not being so bad after all only confirms this point. So yeah, a pretty good short overall. Unfortunately, this is going to be the last time for a while where we'll be able to see good animation and hear the main characters, because now we are descending into the depths of no one's favourite multi-billion-dollar company. That's right, it's time to review some Netflix shit. So, for those who don't know, the Bad Guys have actually had a decent sized presence on Netflix with some holiday specials and a full-fledged TV show which I'll be reviewing shortly, and all of the stories shown on this streaming platform take place before the events of the movies, and are thus designed to give you an idea of what things were like for the bad guys before they went good. Now, I think that making these prequels to the movies was a wise call, as there are far more opportunities for fun stories that can be told within this period which we ultimately know little about, and it's also much less likely to clash with the movies when you set it here. Although with that said, there are still quite a few continuity errors which I'll discuss later. But either way, I like the idea of a Bad Guys prequel. Unfortunately, this material was handled by DreamWorks' television division rather than their main studio. Therefore, this is ultimately the cheaper version of the Bad Guys, and oh boy, can you see it from the visuals alone. Now, I don't want to be too harsh on the television studio, as we all know that they are given far less time and money to work with, and the stuff that they make isn't designed to be on par with the movies that they are based on. They are just meant to be fun, supplementary shows which go in between the big budget shows, as a way to keep kids entertained with these characters and worlds, whilst the A-teens work on the main stuff. And I think that's all perfectly fine. Obviously you do occasionally get pieces of garbage from the TV department, like the Megamind stuff which we do not talk about, but they've also provided us with some real gems which I know have loyal fan bases behind them. I know a lot of people speak highly about some of the How to Train Your Dragon or Kung Fu Panda shows, and let's not forget about All Hail King Julian, which, from my basic knowledge, looks like the single most unhinged thing to ever be associated with DreamWorks. I am honestly fascinated with the show and I haven't even seen it. You know what? I've decided. I'm going to review this show when I reach 10,000 subscribers. I am making that a promise. And on this topic of reviews of DreamWorks shows, many of you may know that I've actually reviewed a certain other DreamWorks show in the past. More specifically, I reviewed The Adventures of Puss in Boots. And you know what? That show was actually pretty decent. Yes, it was flawed in many ways, but it also had plenty of gems to it, and I'd say that I enjoyed my experience with the show overall. And until this point, that show was my main exposure to DreamWorks television, and because of that, I actually went into the Bad Guys stuff thinking that maybe it would also be pretty decent. But man, these holiday specials which came out first do not leave a good first impression. Basically, before the main TV show came out, 2 standalone holiday specials were released, with A Very Bad Holiday coming in Christmas 2023, and Haunted Heist coming in Halloween 2024, with these shorts obviously being themed around Christmas and Halloween, respectively. And unlike the show, which I don't see many people discussing, these specials were pretty hated upon release. They've got very low Letterboxd scores, and most people, both fans and otherwise, have talked about how naff these shorts actually were. And there's a good reason for why this is the common opinion. These shorts really aren't all that good. I mean, let's get the obvious problems out of the way first. The animation sucks here. Again, I understand why it doesn't look great, as the team is working with a much lower budget, but the product still ultimately feels really unpolished. The rendering looks unfinished, and the character movements are so janky, especially in the Christmas short, and on the whole, they just aggressively feel like we have the bad guys at home. And it certainly doesn't help that none of the original voice actors are in any of the Netflix stuff. Although, once again, I'm not exactly surprised by this, as basically none of the DreamWorks TV shows have the original voice actors, and to be fair, I do think that most of the new cast do a good job at impersonating the roles. They're not as good as the original actors, but they do sound close enough. Apart from Webb, she never really sounded right to me. But still, whilst I think these actors did a fine job overall, I do miss the original cast, and these shorts also show a lot of growing pains for these actors. When we get to the main TV show, they all feel far more natural with their performances, as they've clearly gotten more used to impersonating these characters, but in these shorts, I'll admit that things do occasionally feel a bit awkward. Again, not their fault, but it does equally contribute to these shorts not really feeling right. But beyond the weak animation and slightly awkward voice acting, the main reason for why these shorts don't work for me is because they're just not all that interesting. In fact, they're rather uninspired with their stories, which sucks, as the idea of a Bad Guys holiday special has a lot of potential. The Christmas one, for example, had some neat concepts to it. I like the main idea of the short, which says that the bad guys pull off their best heist at Christmas because everyone is at home with their families instead of guarding banks. But the story that comes out of this idea was the most generic and cheesy Christmas story you could possibly imagine. Basically, the bad guys accidentally destroyed a big Santa balloon and made everyone depressed as a result, and now they need to bring back the Christmas spirit just so they can rob everyone. Whilst I do think that there's a nugget of a good idea here, it's all bogged down by way too much feel-good Christmassy schmaltz that just comes across as annoying. Look, I do love Christmas movies, and so I'm naturally not opposed to a bit of holiday cheesiness, but I don't think it fits the bad guys at all. I feel like they are far more suited to a more cynical look at the holidays, and I think that the best jokes of the show are the ones where they subvert traditional Christmas norms, like when they call Santa the world's best criminal and then create a horrifying nightmare of a Santa balloon. This was a pretty funny image, I'll admit. Also, Shark references Hans Gruber from Die Hard in this short. Die Hard is the ultimate alternative Christmas film, so surely that should be an indication for what this short should have done with its tone. Yet instead, A Very Bad Holiday still falls into all of the traditional hallmarks of a generic Christmas short, and I think that's a real shame, as a Bad Santa type story with the bad guys would have been really fun to see. I use Bad Santa as an example because that film features a holiday heist with a shopping mall, and I think that kind of story would have been perfect for these characters, even if it obviously couldn't be as inappropriate as Bad Santa. Yet instead, we don't even get a heist within this short. The closest we get is a scene where Wolf and Snake try and fail to deliver presents. But this is literally the opposite of a heist, and to me, it just felt like a weaker version of Merry Madagascar's plot. In fact, this whole short just made me wish that I was watching literally any other DreamWorks Christmas special, as they are all way better. Even Shrek the Horse is better despite also being pretty cheesy. At least it still has some inspired, creative, and legitimately hilarious moments to it. The Bad Guys Christmas special, meanwhile, only got mild smirks out of me, but it clearly lacked the sauce to be anything strong comedically. And that, coupled with the generic, cheesy, dull Christmas plot, made the overall experience feel really dull and uninspired. And this lack of innovation or creativeness is why I also didn't care much for Haunted Heist either. Whilst I do think that Halloween is a holiday which fits the bad guys a lot more, and the Haunted House was a really fun idea, in execution, it still feels way too standard. It has some creative ideas to it, and on paper, I do like all of the twists here which reveal that the characters were ultimately playing each other in a way that was kinda similar to the Halloween heist from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. But in execution, the twist here felt either way too predictable or way too outlandish to fully believe, and the short lacks enough atmosphere to help its setting to truly stand out. I'm not saying that this short needed to actually terrify kids, although that would have been pretty cool to see, but I wish it did something more to stop itself from feeling like a generic Scooby-Doo clone. The Bad Guys is such a creative and inventive franchise with characters who have electric personalities, and there's so much that you could do with its heist elements, but these shorts only seemed interested in abiding by the most basic of holiday hallmarks rather than doing anything interesting with them, and that's what disappoints me the most. And they're really not that entertaining in my mind because the jokes aren't particularly memorable or funny, and the cast don't have that same natural chemistry that the main actors had. Admittedly, I don't think that either of these specials are awful, as they're pretty short and over with quickly, and they each have the odd, mildly humorous moments, but they are still very generic, and I've got no incentive to go back to them now that I finished this video. If you want more of the Bad Guys, you really don't need to watch these shorts, especially when you've already got the TV show which is right there. Speaking of which, let's now talk about that show, and just like with the Puss and Boots retrospective, I'm gonna go one season at a time in order to keep my thoughts more focused. So, let's start things off with Season 1. The first season of the TV show released shortly after the sequel film came out in 2025. By the way, I should clarify that the TV show doesn't really have a name. It's just called The Bad Guys, the series, which is pretty boring, I won't lie. Apparently it used to be called Breaking In, which is a far more memorable and fitting name, and I have no idea why they changed it. Either way, I actually kind of enjoyed this first season of the show, which really surprised me considering how harsh I was on the holiday specials. But honestly, this season was exactly what I was hoping for when it came to prequel TV adventures with the bad guys. Rather than following generic holiday time cliches, this season is focused on how the bad guys became the bad guys, and it does this by giving us a wide variety of different heists and plots within each episode, and that's exactly what I wanted to see. From the very first episode, Bad Beginnings, we immediately get a museum heist where we can see the bad guys do what they do best, break into places and steal things. This was what was sorely lacking from the holiday specials, so it was great to finally see it here. It wasn't anything mind-blowing, don't get me wrong, but it was fun enough to watch, and the season gave us quite a few of these storylines. Like in the second episode, The Sweet Sweet Steal, we got to spend time in a very unique setting for the franchise, as we followed the bad guys as they broke into a sweet factory and fought a maniacal Willy Wonka type villain. That was a pretty fun and memorable episode. There's definitely a nice variety of different heist locations within this season, and I think that these storylines are balanced out nicely with other kinds of stories where we get to watch the bad guys hang out at home, or deal with a con, or go on the run. There's a decent amount of variety going on here, but it all fits within the crime identity of the bad guys, and I think that's why the season worked for me. I went in hoping for fun crime adventures which fit alongside the characters of the bad guys, and so this show worked for me as a result. And I think that this season also set things up nicely for the second season. Whilst it doesn't have an overarching story like Season 2 does, more on that when I get to it, I still think that this season has a pretty good momentum to it overall, as we get to watch the bad guys slowly but surely make a name for themselves as they become more well known as criminals. A lot of these episodes end by highlighting how the group ranks amongst other criminals within the city, as the news has a top 10 best criminals list, for some reason. Although to be fair, the show recognises how dumb this is, as Tiffany Fluffit does question why they have this list, as surely a top 10 would inspire more crime. But either way, this was still a nice little indicator which helped to show how well known the bad guys were slowly becoming over the season, and I think that it's satisfying to watch them carve more of their own identity as time progresses, and it was especially satisfying when we got to see their main lair show up at the very end of the season. Throughout these episodes, the bad guys' lair was this house which we never saw within the movies, but in the final episode this season, Piranha accidentally blows it up. Thankfully, Wolf's old mentor set them off on a grand heist which eventually led them to the new lair, which became their main base of operations for all Bad Guys material moving forward. It was a satisfying payoff, and it's exactly the kind of thing that I love seeing within prequels, as it's just satisfying to see the increasingly familiar iconography develop over time, and I say that it helps to enhance the overall continuity of the franchise. Although, in saying that, I should probably mention that despite the show's best efforts, it does have some major continuity errors, and the main reason for why its placement within the continuity is questionable is because of Webbs' inclusion. You see, the opening scene of The Bad Guys 2 shows us that Webbs' first mission was in Cairo, and specifically the heist where they got the iconic black car. However, this show doesn't feature the black car, and it instead features a red one, which we never saw within the movies. Yet, Webbs is still part of the team in spite of this, even though that really shouldn't be the case considering what the movies have showed us. It's a pretty glaring error, and honestly, I feel bad that I'm even pointing it out, as I really do feel like the show made an active effort to try and fit into the overall timeline, and this point can be seen within both seasons. Yet it all ended up being for nothing because of the issues that came about from Webbs in the car. Therefore, it's become easier for everyone to just assume that this show is non-canon to the movies, which is something that can be said for most DreamWorks shows to be fair, including The Adventures of Puss in Boots. I don't know when else I'll get the chance to mention this, but I really regret creating that timeline at the end of that retrospective, as it's honestly way easier to just accept the fact that the TV show isn't canon. But yeah, it's kinda sad that the continuity for the show is so messed up, as I feel like it desperately wanted to fit in. But chances are, these seasons were being worked on at the same time as The Bad Guys 2, and I highly doubt that there was much communication between the teams of writers, so the TV crew likely didn't know about the Cairo flashback in The Bad Guys 2, which is annoying, as this one sequence single-handedly broke the continuity. But honestly, I really shouldn't care so much about this. At the end of the day, the prequel elements of this film are still satisfying to watch, even if the show is likely not canon. Although, with this topic of continuity, I do have to ask something. Where the hell is the police chief in the show? For how core she is as a reflection of the bad guys' relationship with the law, it's weird how she's not in this show at all. Like, they had Tiffany Fluffit in the show, but not Misty Luggins for some reason. That's really weird. Oh, and of course, Diane isn't in the show either, but I don't mind as it obviously made no sense for her to be here, as this is a prequel set before she met Wolf. But still, I do miss her. Although the characters do make reference to the Crimson Paw within some of these episodes, so that's probably the closest we'll ever get to Diane my Beloved being in the show. Anyway, that's enough talk of the show's continuity alongside the movies. Let's go back to talking about this season specifically. As I said before, I found the season pretty entertaining, and I think that a lot of its entertainment value came from the variety of stories that were told, as well as for the time we got to spend vibing with these great characters. Now obviously, the bad guys aren't as good in this show compared to the movies, for reasons I discussed during the holiday special segment, but they are still decent, and the voice actors are definitely more comfortable within their roles here, and so their performances lead to a lot more funny moments. However, I still think that the overall group banter isn't quite there, which thus reduces some of the natural comedic banter of the films. But still, I think that the characters are pretty well realised here. They are all pretty true to how they were in the films, and some of them are expanded upon in a way which I think fits them well. For example, we get to see a different and neater side to Piranha within the show. We previously only ever knew him as a bit of a chaos gremlin, but in this show, there's a whole episode dedicated to how much he loves cleaning as he forces everyone else to tidy up the lair. Sure, he may be destructive on a heist, but at home, he wants to relax in his own tidy space. He has a clear separation between home and work, and honestly, I thought that was an interesting thing to highlight about his character. It gives an additional layer to him, and it honestly feels like quite a natural inclusion. And speaking of natural inclusions, we also get a bit more information about Snake's background, as we actually get to see his mother, Serpentina. And honestly, the inclusion of Snake's mother explains a lot about his character. It's often said that you can understand why a character is the way that they are, based off of what their parents are like. Therefore, this means that when we see how cruel and unloving Serpentina is, Snake's grumpy, cynical personality starts to make more sense as a result. But it also shows us why he values the guys so much as friends, as they actually care about him for who he is, and it was sweet to see him realise that within the episode. These kinds of additions are very simple, but they add a lot to the characters, and it helps to give them necessary depth, which helps to keep me engaged as we spend more time with them within this show. Whilst these characters do lack the comedy of the films, they more than make up for it with the additional depth that I found interesting to watch. Although, going off of that point I said about the characters not being at their peak comedically, I think that's honestly a problem which extends towards the whole show. I'll be honest, this show isn't all that funny to me. Over the 2 seasons that I watched, there were very few moments which made me laugh strongly. I'm not saying that there were no funny moments, as I did chuckle a few times, but there were no true gut busters here like the movies had. I'd say that the moment where I was the closest to properly laughing within this season was this scene in the first episode where Wolf and Snake tried to steal the Sad Boy painting, but after staring at it, they had an existential moment just like Cameron and Ferris Bueller. The painting was just so sad that it made them cry, and this joke was funny to me because Wolf's sad face is freaking adorable and hilarious at the same time. But still, comedic moments like this were pretty rare for me. Now, I know someone's going to say that I shouldn't expect the TV show to be as funny as the movies, but I'll have you know that there were plenty of moments in The Adventures of Puss and Boots which made me laugh really hard. It had a handful of funny lines and plenty of absurdist scenarios which got a good laugh out of me. Not every joke in that show was a winner, but the ones which landed were really strong. Here though, the jokes are pretty hit and miss for me, and the hits were only just decent, but were still ultimately pretty unmemorable. I'd say that I got a lot more fun out of the set pieces and the heist tropes rather than any specific jokes within the show, and I think that was honestly a real shame. And even then, many of the stories are a bit weak in execution despite having brilliant ideas on paper, and this was due to a variety of things. First of all, the show unfortunately follows quite a few kids show cliches and pitfalls, which I shouldn't have been surprised about, but still. For example, some episodes felt the need to constantly reiterate the moral lesson, such as in the episode titled Home is Where the Heist Is. This is the episode which introduced Serpentina, and it's primarily focused on the bad guys trying to navigate her home of booby traps in order to prove that they are a good team. It's a pretty fun episode, one of my favourites from the season in fact, but it's unfortunately let down by the fact that Wolf constantly brings up the fact that the team needs to work together in order to succeed. Mentioning this message 1 or 2 times is fine, but it's so constant within this episode and it gets very annoying. Like, I know I'm a 20-year-old talking about a kids show, but I still think that even the dumbest kid will get the moral here. You don't need to over-explain it. I definitely prefer it when kids shows are more subtle with their messaging. But alongside that, there's also some episodes which follow some pretty tired tropes, like the forced misunderstanding plotline, which happens twice this season. The first time it happens is in the Webbs, the Wigglesworth and the Wardrobe, where Webbs thinks she hears Wolf and Snake slagging her off when they actually didn't. And the second instance is in Heist on the Run, where Wolf, Shark and Piranha are all off trying to smuggle an emerald back to the lair, whilst being chased by every criminal in the city after Wolf accidentally docks their location through geotags, but Webbs and Snake are left at the car in order to fix it, and they immediately think that the other guys have betrayed them and run off with the emeralds because they took a while to return. That subplot was pretty dumb, I'll admit, and the lack of trust felt really out of character. I'd understand it if this happened during one of the first episodes, back before the group fully trusted each other, but this is episode 7, so it felt rather dumb and it let down what was otherwise a pretty creative on the run episode. But beyond the cliches, I think the biggest problem with this series is the fact that it is stuck within the confines of being a low-budget DreamWorks show, which thus means that it doesn't have the full potential to be as creative and cool as it wants to be, due to its obvious limitations. Many of the stories in this season are great on paper, but in execution, they don't feel as exciting as they should be because the animation or direction doesn't allow for it, with many moments lacking that extra oomph that's needed. Like, this show has plenty of car jumps, but none of them are able to capture the same visceral excitement that any of the car scenes from the movies have, because its low-budget animation can't allow for that. And I think that's a real shame, as it leads to the episodes not feeling all that memorable as a result. Oh, and speaking of the animation, I should say that it's still not great within this show, and it does still have the occasional janky moment. Thankfully, it felt nowhere near as bad as the holiday specials, however, I honestly don't know whether that's because the animation actually got any better, or whether I just got used to it. But in the end, it's still not great. I personally felt like this show overall lacked the great comedy and energy that the movies provided, and that was probably my biggest disappointment with the series. And I think that this point can best be reflected within the final episode of the season, titled Crime After Crime. Now, the plot of this episode is that the bad guys need to commit 5 heists in one night after discovering a challenge from Wolfsword Mentor. Now, that's a brilliant plot, which I assumed would lead to an exciting, high-stakes adventure with the characters on a major time crunch as they try to get to the new lair in time. However, whilst it was nice to see the guys revisit familiar locations from the various episodes this season, which thus gave the whole thing a nice bookend, the actual heists weren't all that exciting, and some of them weren't even heists as Shark just used a claw machine and Piranha stayed at home. And whilst the ending mentioned that they have only 1 minute to get to the door before it locks, the scene noticeably spent way longer than a minute to get there, and I felt like that ended up taking away all of the urgency and stakes of the situation. And as a result of aspects just like that, the overall episode didn't feel as exciting as it should have, and that's a consistent problem within this show as a whole. The locations and set pieces are fun, but the episodes themselves lack that extra punch, and as a result, they don't really stand out to me, and I can honestly say that there's no episode in this season which I would consider to be top tier. And this once again contrasts to the Adventures of Puss and Boots, where I could point to various episodes and say that they were legitimately excellent due to creative ideas, strong comedy, or high stakes. Whereas within this show, the best episodes were solid, but that's kind of it. Although thankfully, I didn't think that any of the episodes were that bad either. Although there were still some mediocre ones, such as the one where Snake becomes a baby to con a rich guy. That episode was kinda whatever, and it made me question whether it's kids show lore for there to always be one episode where a character becomes a baby, as it's genuinely such a common trope. But still, I didn't mind the episode overall, as it thankfully wasn't filled with annoying baby jokes, and Snake still acted like his normal cynical self. And he's pretty cute as a baby, so I can't diss this episode too much. But on the whole, I don't really have much to say about the episode selection here. I mean, I liked the on-the-run element of Heist on the Run, but it's let down by a cliche subplot. I liked the additional characterization given to Snake in Home is Where the Heist Is, but his messages were still rather on the nose. And there's plenty of good action set pieces throughout this season, but it doesn't feel as exciting as it could have been because the direction doesn't allow for the episodes to be as good as they are on paper. And honestly, I'd argue that the season is at its best when it's more low-key and focused on primarily vibing with these great characters. Like, for as gross as the septic tank scenes with Wolf are in the episode This Means Chore, I still enjoyed the overall package as it gave us an opportunity to hang out with the characters and enjoy their personalities within a more low-stakes, at-home environment. Plus, I admittedly still find the septic tank scenes funny. Yes, it is gross, but it's so absurd that it loops back around and becomes pretty funny, honestly. Oh, and speaking of episodes at home, I rather enjoyed the Webs, the Wigglesworth, and the Wardrobe, because I thought that pathetic loser con artist Wigglesworth was a fun character to pair with the bad guys. Plus, he's played by voice acting legend Patton Oswalt, so he was naturally pretty fun to watch as a result. And finally, as I said before, Home is Where the Heist is probably my favourite episode of the season. I can honestly look past some of its on-the-nose messaging, as the booby trap set pieces were fun and exciting to watch, and we got a chance to watch all of the bad guys in action as they made their way through the house. But I'd say that on the whole, this episode selection will certainly keep a kid entertained. Hell, I was pretty entertained whilst watching. But unfortunately, they really lacked memorability for me, and I can't say that any of the episodes are really incentivizing me to rewatch them. And I think that summarizes my thoughts on the season as a whole. It certainly works for what it is, and its Crime of the Week formula was exactly what I was hoping for from the show going in, and I can absolutely confirm that this season is way better than the holiday specials. In fact, if those two specials were properly a part of the show, they would be the worst episodes by far. So that should give you an idea of how much better the show is by comparison. But unfortunately, the season still doesn't hit all that hard for me. It was satisfying to witness the prequel elements here, and the season had a good momentum to it with a fun variety of episodes, but said episodes left a lot to be desired. This season was definitely not bad, not by a long shot, but it's equally not amazing either. And spoiler alert, my thoughts on Season 2 are quite similar in some ways, but it's still pretty different in others, so I've still got something unique to talk about. Season 2 of the Bad Guys series released just this year in the spring of 2026, and it not only followed on from the setup of the first season, but it also ended up feeling bigger and more exciting due to its inclusion of a season-wide story arc. The first season by comparison didn't really have a story arc, as it was more focused on an end goal for the characters, as they spent each episode trying to be recognised for their crimes. This season, meanwhile, not only follows on from an intriguing cliffhanger left in the final episode of Season 1, but it also gives us storylines which build up over multiple episodes, and there are also quite a few instances of episodes which lead directly into another. For example, the third episode, Natural History, ends with a call from Serpentina, which leads directly into the fourth episode, A Nice Day for a Bad Wedding, which is all about her wedding to loser Chud Wigglesworth. But then at the end of that episode, we find out that this was all a plot by Serpentina to get the bad guys out of the lair so that it can be searched by Wolf's former mentor, DB Cougar, who then becomes the focal point of the fifth episode, Memento Mori. Great title, by the way. And speaking of DB Cougar, his presence is felt throughout a lot of the first half of the season, as he's the mysterious figure who is eyeing up the lair. This build-up helps to make it even more exciting and satisfying when he finally reveals himself, and it just helps to make this whole season feel that bit more interconnected. Even if some episodes do technically feel like filler, their presence within the season nonetheless feels important, because they are usually tied into one of the arcs this season. And speaking of these arcs, the DB Cougar stuff is actually only present within the first half of the season, as the second is focused on a completely different storyline focused on the character of Ripper. We initially see her kidnap DB Cougar as well as the bad guys impersonators, and then we eventually see her being advertised on posters and whatnot. And this effectively builds up a threat well, and it leads in nicely to the two-part finale, Fear the Ripper, where we finally get to see what she can do. These various multi-episode long storylines are an effective way to give the season some real momentum, as it's able to pique your curiosity at the end of each episode, as you're just left wondering where the season's going to go by the end. Even if an episode wasn't one of your favourites, you're at least teased with something bigger and worth seeing, and that certainly encouraged me to keep watching. So yeah, I thought that this was a pretty cool addition to this season overall, and that certainly made the overall narrative here much more engaging for me in comparison to Season 1. However, as I alluded to before, I still wasn't mad on the season as a whole. Now, I don't think that is bad or anything. In fact, I slightly preferred the season to the first, as I had a bit more going on and there were a few more memorable episodes. But I still don't find it to be anything mind-blowing. The best and most memorable episodes for me were still hampered by those flaws I mentioned before, like the low-budget animation and bland direction which prevented them from feeling as exciting as they could have been. And there's still quite a few tired cliches that you've seen from many other kids' shows, like how in Natural History, Wolf is so annoyingly stubborn and takes way too long to change his mind, despite him being so obviously in the wrong for trusting Talia, the Neanderthal guard who he thought was the first thief. And on the whole, the show still isn't all that funny for the most part. Although to be fair, there were more moments here that I could point to and say were pretty decently humorous. Again, there weren't any major gutbusters, but there were still some solid jokes here nonetheless. I like the subplot in Natural History where Piranha and Shark, who are nicknamed the Finbros in the show, have a secret friendship with a guard called Gary. I don't know, I just thought it was funny to watch these criminals and this guard hang out and have fun, and I got a laugh out of the glorified breakup scene that occurred after the Finbros realised that they couldn't hang out with Gary anymore. You see, this is the kind of comedic absurdity that was missing within the show. And speaking of which, I think that the episode titled The Contest nailed a lot of this comedic absurdity, and it thus became one of the funnier episodes of the show as a result, which also made it one of the best in my eyes. And I'm surprised about that fact, as I honestly hated this episode within its first few minutes. Why? Because it had the most boring, annoying English stereotypes I've ever seen. You see, the bad guys initially wanted to steal the crown jewels when the Queen came to visit, but her flight was delayed by bad weather, and the guys react to this news by putting on the cringiest attempts at English accents I have ever heard.
What the bobbies?
Now, I'm not offended by people stereotyping my country, but I am offended when they do it this badly. First of all, we don't have a queen anymore. Move with the times, bro. Second, the accents that they put on is that generic, stereotypical posh Westminster type accent, when it would have been way funnier to see the bad guys attempt literally any other accent. Why not Cockney East End? That's usually the accent associated with British criminal gangs, so it would have fit the bad guys' identity really well. Or you could have gone the extra mile and given them Blummy Peaky Blinders accents. That could have been really funny to hear. Or they could have given them anything else besides this one posh accent that Americans exclusively parody, as they think it's the one accent that we've got. Just give us some variety, damn it. And another thing, Wolf gives the group the nickname of the Bad Lads, in spite of the fact that the Bad Blokes was a name that was right there and would have been a way better British nickname for them. It's got nice alliterations, so why didn't you use it, Wolf? Are you stupid? So yeah, let this be a lesson to all of you comedy writers out there. If you want to make fun of the English, I give you permission, but only if you do it well. Don't copy the same 5 jokes and parody the same accent. Just give us some variety, please. Or just look at how the Scottish makes fun of us, as it is honestly an art form over there. Anyway, moving on from one of my worst tangents here, this episode does thankfully get better after this point. You see, the plot is all about the guys trying to go 12 hours without committing a single crime, and I think that the comedic scenarios that come out of this storyline are great, from Snake tricking Piranha, to Wolf being tempted to do crime by a fictional character that he loved as a kid, with the character in question being this French wolf thief called Le Grand Loup. Now, I know I just criticised the episode for its generic English stereotyping, but the French ones I'm okay with. Either way, I do honestly quite like the presence of Le Grand Loup. It's fun to see the fictional character that inspired Wolf's persona, and it's cool how he's all presented in black and white to fit the graphic novel aesthetic of the character. He was a fun face to see, and his dynamic with Wolf was very entertaining. But the silliest yet funniest part of the episode comes about when Shark is so deep in character as boring accountant Norman that he actually begins to lash out. He puts on this boring persona to prevent any crime temptation, but Wolf exploits this by improvising as Norman's husband, who tells him that their kid is going to die, and Shark reacts to this by trying to kill Wolf and harvest his organs in order to save the fake kid. Again, this is the kind of comedic absurdity that I like to see. It's a ridiculous idea, but it's definitely memorable and humorous. Also, it's interesting that Wolf claimed to be Norman's husband, and Shark didn't question it, thus implying that the character of Norman is canonically gay. Now, I don't want to assume Shark's sexuality, but if one of his characters is queer, then he's clearly an ally at the very least. So that's pretty cool. Wait, hang on a minute.
Yeah, we all know the tooth fairies are real.
No, she or he or they are definitely real.
Alright, so Shark is not only okay with playing queer characters, but he also recognises they-them pronouns. Yep, that confirms it. Shark is a queer ally through and through. Again, I don't know his sexuality, but I respect his support all the same. But overall, I had fun with this episode, and the final twist that Webbs was ultimately playing everyone in order to win the competition was pretty satisfying and cool to watch. And alongside this episode, there's a few others that I thought had memorable moments to them. The first episode, The Heist Over, is a fun little homage to The Hangover, as it has all the major plot beats of that film, from the mystery of what happened, to someone being in the boot of the car, to Snake saying, "What the heck is going on?" to the plot being all about finding a missing person. However, in this case, it was Piranha who went missing, and it was eventually revealed that he was actually just bored by Shark the whole time. Alongside this, the episode titled I, Webbs also stood out to me thanks to its anti-AI messaging, as Webbs created a clanker called Beverly who's very efficient at planning out heists and performing getaways. But, in Beverly's attempts to be efficient, she misses the fun part of heisting. Sure, her plan to steal all the lithium from the world would be more profitable, but the bad guys' plan to steal some beans is more fun and personal to them. It may seem like the more amateur heist, but the bad guys steal for the love of the game, rather than for profit. It's all about the process, not the destination, and that's something which a damn clanker would never understand. Honestly, this episode fit pretty well within the Bad Guys franchise, a franchise which also included an anti-AI message in the credits of the second movie. And alongside this, the episode which followed on from this one, Bad Actors, tickled me personally because it featured the bad guys on a film set, which thus meant that I chuckled at some of the jokes related to that setting. I particularly liked the part where Snake was given a boom mic, and he commented on how heavy it was as he struggled to lift it. That part was very relatable to me. I've done boom operating in the past, and let me tell you, I suck at holding boom mics because I am so weak. Although for me, it's less so the heaviness of the boom that's the problem, and instead the real issue comes from the fact that you have to hold it for long periods of time. That's what ultimately does me in. So yeah, this part stood out to me as a funny moment as a result. Although, the rest of the episode was pretty fun too, as we got to see Shark go full diva in an attempt to smear the reputation of a famous actress out of spite. Although it was kinda dumb that this spite only came about because he misremembered his own past. That's admittedly let down the episode for me, and that once again brings me back to the point that I've mentioned many times now. For as much as I liked some of these episodes, I still don't think that any of them are truly great. They have funny moments, but they're bogged down by various issues, like the lack of excitement from the direction, or the fact that the really funny moments are quite few and far between. and the non-plot episodes which I didn't discuss are all pretty mediocre, I'll admit. Luckily, Memento Mori is a solid episode with some memorable plane set pieces, even if it is a bit predictable that DB Cougar is going to betray the guys and convince Wolf to do the same, but it's still a good episode overall. And most importantly, I thought that the two-part Fear the Ripper finale was actually really solid and helped to elevate the season as a whole. First of all, it was satisfying to see all of the previously antagonistic criminal groups finally work together with the guys in order to defeat the bigger threat in the form of the vigilante, Ripper, who's trying to stamp out all crime in the city. Now, I recognise that I haven't yet brought up the Night Owls or the Gruff Goats within this video, but that was just because I don't really have much to say about them. They rival gangs to the bad guys, but they're not all that funny or memorable, and the Gruff Goats look ugly as hell, I won't lie, with those cuboid heads. But it was nonetheless satisfying to see all the characters working together in the first part of the finale until we get to the great little cliffhanger where they're all trapped by Ripper. And that leads me on to the final episode, which I thought was a satisfying ending all around. It does have a lot going on within 25 minutes, which therefore means that some parts do feel a little bit rushed through, but it's still got a good amount of action, escapes, and hijacking for me to remain decently engaged throughout. It was interesting to see how Ripper basically turned the city into a fascist police state in her attempt to stamp out all crime, and it was satisfying to watch her get taken down by her own devices. Although, I once again have to ask, where the hell is the chief in all this? I honestly still don't understand why she's not in the show. Although, whilst that element of the show's continuity is weird, I still like the fact that we finally got to see Wolf get his iconic white suit within this episode. That was pretty cool to witness after 2 seasons in a blue suit. Although he did have the white suit in Cairo 5 years ago, so this is technically another continuity error. This single flashback at the start of the Bad Guys 2 really did wreck everything that was built up here, didn't it? It's quite sad, honestly, especially when there was also a whole episode this season that was dedicated to Piranha graduating from the getaway driver to the muscle of the group, which is what he's now associated with. It was definitely weird to watch this show and initially see Piranha be the driver, but I thought it was pretty satisfying in this episode to see Wolf finally get behind that wheel. But once again, the Bad Guys 2 made this plotline pretty redundant. You know what, I should stop caring so much about the damn continuity. Instead, I'm going to wrap up my thoughts on the season as a whole, as I think I've covered pretty much everything. Overall, I definitely say that I'm more positive on Season 2 in comparison to the first season, as there are a lot more memorable episodes and moments, and I still didn't think that there were any noticeably bad episodes here. The worst this season got was a little bit mediocre, boring, and unmemorable. However, I still wouldn't say that I really like this season, as it does lack the extra spark to make it feel special. It put in a lot of effort to feel more exciting thanks to its season-wide arcs and interconnected stories, and sometimes it was successful, but I still can't say that there's anything here that I truly loved, and that's something that can be said about the rest of the show too. And with that point mentioned, I may as well wrap up my feelings on the show as a whole. Overall, The Bad Guys the series is still a stupid name, call it Breaking In, you cowards, and it's also a rather mediocre show. Although I'd still probably say that it's on the good side of mediocre. It's got a handful of laughs with decent stories and ideas, and I was never miserable whilst watching this show. I was entertained throughout, and I think if you have a kid who loves the Bad Guys, they'd probably love the show too, as it's a great way to spend more time with these characters. They may not be as funny as they are in the movies, but the new voice actors do a good job with what they've got, I'd say, and I think that there's a decent amount of additional depth that's given to them. The continuity with the overall lore of the franchise is completely wrecked here, so much so that I have to officially dub the show as non-canon in order to avoid any kind of headache, but the characters remain consistent with their personalities, and that's what's more important, I'd say. But for me personally, this show doesn't really offer anything new that the movies don't already provide. It has some decently funny moments here and there, but on the whole, it's pretty weak comedically, and that really takes away from the overall entertainment potential of these episodes, and the boring direction and animation certainly doesn't help. The episodes are still fine, and the show is way better than the holiday specials. As I said, if they counted, they would be the worst episodes of the show, as the main episodes are way less awkward and cringy, but it still isn't anything to write home about. It's a solid 6 out of 10 show, but that's about it. It works for what it is, and there are bound to be kids who'll love it, but I think I'm a bit too old for it nowadays, and I definitely wouldn't have watched the whole thing if I wasn't making this video. I probably would have watched a few episodes and then moved on to something else which I figured I'd get more out of. And I'm likely not going to rewatch any of it now that this video is done, unlike the movies which I will happily return to constantly. But before I return to talking about the big budget stuff once again, I would like to answer one question some of you may have. Do I prefer this show to The Adventures of Puss in Boots, the only other DreamWorks show that I've watched and reviewed in its entirety? Well, it's a little bit hard to judge, as Puss in Boots has way more episodes to work with, which thus means that there's a lot more going on. but I'd say that overall, I feel that The Bad Guys was consistently decent with nothing being amazing and nothing being awful, whilst Puss in Boots was all over the place with its quality. Some episodes were legitimately excellent and have remained memorable for me, even divorced from the context of making that video, but at the same time, some of the episodes were painfully bad. You may remember how much I despised Season 3 of The Adventures of Puss in Boots, and how it nearly made me stop watching that show altogether. I never had anything close to that feeling with The Bad Guys show, so that's definitely a big plus. But I equally never felt the highs of The Adventures of Puss in Boots. So really, I say pick your poison. Puss in Boots has way higher highs and lower lows, but The Bad Guys is a much easier watch as it's not only got less episodes, but the episodes in question are consistently decent. The worst episodes here are just mediocre, whilst the worst episodes of The Adventures of Puss in Boots left me feeling drained. But if I'm forced to pick just one, I did admittedly get more out of The Adventures of Puss in Boots in the long run, as I liked quite a few of the episodes, I had way more to say about the show overall, and it was just generally a lot funnier on the whole. Neither show is amazing though, but they were both at least fun to review in a video, as basically no one else has talked about them in complete detail. Although, I should say that I don't actually know whether Season 2 is the end of the Bad Guys show, as there's been no news on whether a Season 3 is happening or not. It's still pretty up in the air. However, the ending of Season 2 did give the show a nice sense of finality, as the presence of the meteor helped to tie up the last loose end with the first film. So yeah, I can't really tell what the future of the series will be, and I wouldn't be surprised if they stop here. But if anything new does come, I'll only review it in a video if I'm also reviewing the next movie whenever that releases. But on its own, it's really not going to be a priority of mine to talk about the show again. So if Season 3 has been released at the time you're watching this video, please don't beg me to review it, as I'm not going to talk about it unless there's a movie to also talk about. Anyway, with all that being said, let's move away from all of this Netflix stuff, as we are finally back in the realm of Bad Guys material with high quality animation and the original voice cast. Oh, how I've missed them. But before I talk about the next movie, which you're probably dying to hear my thoughts on, we've still got one more short film that I want to get through first.
Shh, just let me do the talking. Hey, hello.
Little Lies and Alibis was a short film which was actually first played in cinemas before showings of DreamWorks' other major 2025 release, Dogman. Now, I actually missed seeing Dogman in cinemas, as I had a lot going on at the time it released, and I'm a little bit upset that I missed it, as I've now seen the film and I think it's really great. But thankfully, in spite of the fact that I missed this time in cinemas, I can still watch this short as it came bundled alongside The Bad Guys 2 on physical media, and so it's now become a bit like Maraschino Ruby, a fun special feature that's made to go alongside the movie that it's attached to. And honestly, I feel that this short was a lot better than Maraschino Ruby. The plot here is all about the bad guys trying to get to their parole meeting on time, but everything keeps going wrong for them and we get to witness the wacky misadventures that they got up to on this journey, which should have been straightforward. Now, the plot of getting to the parole office is a very simple one, but it's really effective I'd say, and the film absolutely nails its comedic absurdity. It's funny to bear witness to the situation becoming worse and worse for all the characters as time progresses. It all goes wrong due to a simple parking violation, because of course it does, as parking is the absolute worst, and then the car is destroyed, the guys take the wrong bus, they piss off some bikers, cause a ruckus on the road, and then things just go completely off the rails in ways we can't fully understand. I absolutely loved that string of cutaways that were shown throughout the middle of the short. I definitely think that it was way funnier to only get glimpses of these crazy situations that the guys found themselves in on their journey, and the punchline that they were actually in the post office the whole time rather than the parole office was great, and it led to a good final laugh. But in spite of all the craziness, I do think that this short has a pretty nice moment to it where the guys eventually decide to make an active effort to stop a crime that's currently in progress. Specifically, it's a crime that's being committed by bad guys impersonators, which was strangely enough a plotline from the TV show as well. Go figure. But yeah, it was an effective way to show how much the guys have ultimately changed. They didn't need to do anything about the situation, but they chose to stop the crime anyway in an attempt to straighten these would-be criminals out, and I think that really helps this short to fit in nicely alongside the films. It definitely ties into the overall narrative of the bad guys becoming more good, and the parole plot obviously ties into them being released from prison at the end of the first film. And unlike the show, the continuity here is actually on point. In fact, this short actually did an effective job at explaining why Wolf's car was so crappy in the second film. Obviously the OG black one was destroyed at the end of the first movie, but Diane gave them a new one at the end of that film which had this cool yellow stripe down it, which we eventually saw again in Maraschino Ruby. Yet that's not present within the second film, and the reason for why is because it's shown to be destroyed within this short. That small continuity detail was pretty cool to see here honestly. So yeah, I rather enjoyed this short. It feels like a very natural inclusion to the franchise, and it just makes sense to always watch it alongside the film that it's bundled with. And I think that's the best thing that one of these extra shorts can be. It feels like an add-on that's worth revisiting alongside the film, rather than being something that I choose to skip. And the short itself is really fun and creative. It's obviously not the deepest short in the world, but it's not trying to be. For what it is, it's a great little watch, and it ties into the Bad Guys 2 really, really nicely. And with that point made, I think it's about time that we finally discuss this elusive sequel that I've been building up towards. It feels crazy for me to say that The Bad Guys 2 came out around a year ago in 2025. It honestly feels like it was only yesterday that I was getting hyped for this film after seeing its first teaser poster. And can I just say, this is one of the coolest teaser posters I have ever seen. Like, there is unreal amounts of sauce dripping from this poster. I love the colours, I love the silhouette, and Wolf has so much damn aura. The main poster's decent, don't get me wrong, but there's a reason for why I use this poster as a way to represent this film on Letterboxd. But either way, it really doesn't feel like it's been a year since I first saw this film. But honestly, it was a joy to revisit it after all this time, as The Bad Guys 2 is able to maintain the trend of so many other DreamWorks sequels of being not only a worthy follow-up from the original, but also, in my opinion, being even better. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, let's go over the basics. So, the plot for this film takes place a good year and a bit after the events of the first movie, and it follows the newly reformed bad guys who are struggling to get anywhere within a society who still sees them as criminals. They can't get a job and are constantly blamed for other people's crimes, including the actions of the elusive Phantom Bandit, who's stealing a material called MacGuffinite. You get it? The MacGuffin for this film is called MacGuffinite. But after the guys try their best to stop the bandit themselves, they find themselves being framed for the crime, and are now forced to hide from the law whilst also helping a different group of criminals with their own mission. Now, this different group isn't actually given a name within the film itself, but all the marketing and additional material calls them the Bad Girls, so that's what I'm going to call them too. Now, right off the bat, I want to say that I think The Bad Guys 2 works incredibly well as a sequel to the original. First up, it maintains a lot of the same strong elements of that original film. It's still got the main voice actors giving it their A-game with their performances, and the dynamic and banter with one another is spot on, the comedy is mostly really strong here, Daniel Pemberton's score still kicks ass, and the music not done by Pemberton is also great, and the animation and overall direction are both top tier here, and it gives this film a spectacle quality that is just amazing to watch. Now, I already thought that the action was excellent within the original film, but it's somehow even better here. The opening car chase in Cairo is so insanely well put together and exciting to watch, the wrestling fight is really fun and allows for a neat variety of different animation techniques, Diane is able to kick so much ass once again in the scene with some amazing fight choreography, and the scene where the bad guys jump from a helicopter onto a frickin' rocket ship and desperately climb up it and get inside as it blasts into space, my goodness, that was one of the best action set pieces from all of animation last year. And yes, I watched Neja 2 and K-pop Demon Hunters. This was genuinely on the same level. This scene just went so damn hard and was absolutely amazing to watch. It felt like the kind of insane stunt that you would see within a Mission Impossible movie, yet it's allowed to go even crazier because it's animation. And speaking of which, I quite like how this film tried to go in a slightly different direction with its overall vibe, and thus became more like a Mission Impossible movie, in comparison to the first film, which is more like Ocean's 11. It still has a basic crime movie feel throughout, particularly during the brilliant wedding heist in the middle, but the heists are admittedly quite few and far between here, so I think it was wise to go in a slightly different direction with its style and influences, and the spectacle action approach akin to Mission Impossible fit well, I'd say. And hey, they even referenced Mission Impossible in this behind the scenes video.
So clearly it's not impossible.
Oh, how I miss when these kinds of animation behind the scenes gags were commonplace. But still, this is a fun little promotional video. But either way, I like how much this film recaptured what made the original film so good, whilst also carving out its own unique identity which fit the grander spectacle. Now, I will admit that I think this greater focus on spectacle inadvertently caused the film to lose a little bit of the sophistication that I love seeing within the original, but what we have here is still really cool for what it is. But I think the main reason for why this film is such a good sequel is because of how it continues the overall narrative that was set up in the original. I say that this film takes a bit of a Shrek 2 approach to its story, where the original ended in a great way, almost like a happily ever after, and the sequel aims to show you what happened after this happily ever after. Yes, the bad guys are out of prison, but now what? You can't just live your life normally after being a criminal for so long, as there's so many difficulties which come afterwards, and this film shines a direct spotlight on these difficulties. Whilst we the audience know that the bad guys have become good, the regular people in the city don't. They still only see the bad guys for their criminal records, and so they don't trust them with any job. We get to see how much the guys are struggling with life at the moment as they have little money and no luck during job interviews, and many of the interviewers are actively opposed to hiring them because they simply don't trust them. Now, on the one hand, you can understand why things have ended up this way. The bad guys have been publicly bad for so long that it will inevitably be hard for them to gain anyone's trust. But on the other hand, it's an upsetting turn of events because we know that the bad guys have changed, yet they aren't given the opportunity to show anyone that change. No one gives them that chance. The only one who did give them a chance was Diane, but that was purely because she personally understood them and their growth. Your average person, meanwhile, doesn't. And I think that this film therefore does a great job at highlighting a societal issue faced by reformed criminals. Obviously it's great when a felon is able to get their life sorted as they move past a life of crime, but the journey is way harder for them than it needs to be, because most places won't hire anyone with a criminal record, even if they have changed. This is a very common struggle, and so it felt like the natural direction to take this story within the sequel. And what's great is that these ideas persist throughout this film and are a core part of the overall themes, even beyond the opening scenes with the failed job interviews. There's a bit partway through the film where Kitty Cat tells Wolf about the first thing she ever stole, that being the lollipops at school, all because she was never given one by the teacher who never saw her as a good kid. She swiped the lollipops in response and gave them to the kids herself as a power move. This is important to mention because it not only reflects an idea from the first film all about how people are much more likely to become criminals if you always perceive them as criminals, but this story she tells also causes Wolf to question his place within the world. He asked the guys whether being good was actually the right call, as all they got out of it was job rejections and arguably a more restrictive lifestyle. He obviously doesn't want to slip back into his old ways, but this little conversation was so important to include, I feel, because it links back into the struggle shown earlier, as it highlights just how easy and tempting it can be for a reformed criminal to relapse. It's not because they are inherently bad, it's instead simply because this is the only life that they know, and society's prejudice won't allow them to break out of it. I think that the way that this film shows off these real world issues was very impactful and important, and whilst it obviously can't give an answer to these problems, it still reminds the audience of what the first film said, that they should do good for themselves. It doesn't matter that society is always going to see the bad guys as criminals, they still decide to do the right thing at the end of the day. And ultimately, their good actions eventually wrapped back around and benefited them massively, as it led to the police chief, the commissioner, to turn a corner and actually begin to trust them. It was a rocky road to get to this point with a lot of humorous misunderstandings, but eventually the commissioner gained their trust, and I think that was what was ultimately important. Maybe they couldn't gain the trust of everyone, but they still had one person who was able to see them for who they were, all because they consistently made the effort to be good and do the right thing. The film effectively highlighted that these small steps do go a long way in the end, and it was satisfying to see the arc of the commissioner as she grew closer to the guys. I know I haven't talked much about Misty Loggins, but honestly, I think she's hilarious and is a great adversary turned ally within these films, and I'd love to see more of her in the future. This is why I was sad that she wasn't in the show, as she's a great, fun character. Also, speaking of the guys doing good things, I like how this film maintained the idea that the group's strong bond is what's most important to them. When Wolf, Shark, Piranha and Webbs think that Snake is the Phantom Bandit, they make an effort to get to him before the Commissioner does, because they don't want him to commit the crime. Obviously this scene is played for laughs with the characters being angry at Snake and then immediately attacking him in a hilarious sequence, but I like the fact that they were still going to make an active effort to stop him dead in his tracks from stealing anymore. They risked antagonizing the Commissioner just so they could stop their friend from getting in trouble himself. They are good friends first, and that's clearly more important to them. Now obviously, they got things completely wrong as Snake was perfectly innocent, but I still think that was an interesting thing to highlight, and it made for a neat parallel to the end of the first movie where they basically did the same thing. So yeah, I think that a lot of the ideas from this original film were carried over to this movie really well, and the overall themes remained very strong and effective here. Plus, the overall narrative felt like the perfect continuation from what was set up, and the main story that's being told within this film is also absolutely fantastic on its own merits, as it does a brilliant job at leaving a substantial impact on the franchise moving forward. This plot felt significant in both the short and the long term, and it was honestly just a really great watch. I mean, for starters, this is just a really tight story, and way better than the plot for the original films. The original film's plot was decent, but it still had a few cliché tropes and an unremarkable villain. The Bad Guys 2, meanwhile, feels fresh, straight to the point, and Kitty Cat is a far better villain than Marmalade ever was. In fact, the Bad Girls as a whole are a really fun group here. Pigtail has a great energy to her, and I love her Bulgarian accent, and it's funny that she's basically a massive crime fangirl who gushes over the guys. And then there's Doom, who is not only really damn cool, probably my favourite of these three, but her relationship with Snake is hysterical. Now yes, she was just playing with his emotions so that she could get to the guys, but that never stops the flirtatious banter between the pair, and it is absolute gold. Plus, it seems like DreamWorks is keeping up the trend of having animals of different species doing unique things together. We already had Donkey and Dragon canonically fucking, and now we've got straight up war between a bird and a snake. Maybe this is the writer's barely disguised fetish, but I still thought that it was absolutely hilarious at the same time. Yes, Doom is cool on her own, make no mistake of that, but I largely love her because of her relationship with Snake. I think it definitely helps that Marc Maron and Natasha Lyonne are friends in real life, as that really aids the chemistry between the characters. But anyway, going back to Kitty Cat, I think she's a really threatening force for the characters, as she's not only physically intimidating, but her actions within the film consistently lead to dire consequences for the characters, particularly for my girl Diane. You see, the only reason for why the bad guys are helping Kitty Cat with her plan is because she's threatening to leak Diane's Crimson Paw identity to the world. Now obviously, Wolf cares deeply for Diane, and he doesn't want that to happen. So he's now got a personal stake within the story, and Kitty Cat's got a clear ace up her sleeve. And I think that this storyline represents exactly why I said that this plot was so tight. This video has a clear purpose within the narrative, and it significantly amps up the stakes of both Wolf and Diane, and it's eventually paid off later within the magnet trap that Kitty Cat sets up after she double crosses the guys. Every time the bad guys turns off the magnet, the upload for the video continues, and it only stops when they are stuck together. It's a diabolical but ingenious plan which leads to one of the most intense scenes from the whole film, where the guys desperately try to stop the upload in any way that they can, despite being on the clock. But in the end, they actually fail. Diane's secret is exposed and her life is ruined. This is a brilliant turning point for the narrative for multiple reasons. First of all, it truly highlights how much of a threat Kitty Cat is, as she single-handedly brought down the governor and made Wolf feel like he failed her. Second, her actions ultimately led to Professor Marmalade to be released from prison, which thus means that he's back to wreak havoc once again, and based on the post-credit scene, it looks like he'll certainly be doing something nefarious in the third movie. Oh, and speaking of which, I honestly really like Professor Marmalade within this film. I thought that he was hilarious in both his actions and his new appearance, and the Silence of the Lambs spoof was just brilliant. But wow, what a coincidence. 2 2025 sequels to furry movies featured a scene with the previous movie's villain in the Silence of the Lambs spoof. What are the chances of that? But anyway, the third and final reason for why Diane's exposure was really well done and felt significant here is because the film actually committed to the storyline. I'll be honest, on first viewing, I had doubts on whether this leak would actually mean anything in the long term. I was fully convinced that the film was going to throw out some BS which would lead to everything magically fixing itself Phineas and Ferb style. I just assumed that everyone would somehow forget what happened, or Diane would be able to get away with calling the video fake, or something like that. But no, nothing changes. Diane's secret is revealed, and this permanently changes her status within the franchise, and I think that's brilliant. It's heartbreaking, don't get me wrong, and I think that the scene where she realises she's been cancelled is devastating, but I like the fact that this significant plot point felt like it had some serious weight behind it. It added so much to the wider stakes of the film, and it caused me to be so hooked into the story on first viewing. Because it went in this direction that legitimately surprised me, I had no idea what would happen next, and so I found myself becoming legitimately hooked by the story as a result. And then the film afterwards literally went out of this world, and that ended up becoming so cool to me. Although, I will admit that I can't help but think that this film has the exact same climax as the cinematic masterpiece that is Hit Pig. That's a funny comparison. But yeah, I definitely think that The Bad Guys 2 has a damn good story to it. The narrative consistently built upon itself and left me hooked and on the edge of my seat throughout, and I walked away feeling like the experience was significant and worthwhile. And I am now super excited to see where this story will go next. The film ends with the bad guys faking their deaths after heading back to Earth. Side note, but the smash cut between Wolf's inspirational speech and the funeral scene legitimately made me laugh out loud in the cinema on first viewing. I honestly think this may have been my favourite joke from the whole movie, as its comedic timing was just perfect. But either way, these fake deaths allowed the bad guys to take on new identities as secret agents for the organisation ISGLOP, and I think that this was a brilliant way to end things. It doesn't fix the damage that fell upon the characters within this film, as their lives have still been changed forever, but it's nonetheless a satisfying way to end things, as we know that these characters have finally been given the second chance that they deserve. And this second chance was largely organised by the Commissioner, the one person who saw their change for what it was. I just think that this is a great way to cap off the film, and it once again just made the whole story feel tight. The plot felt important and significant, and it's got repercussions for the rest of the series moving forward, yet it also opens up a lot of new story ideas which I'm excited to see. Oh, and the fancy suits that were shown off in the ending was so peak. Plus, this moment also seems to be implying that Diane is officially a part of the team now. She doesn't need her cover anymore, she can get right in with the action, and that makes me even more excited to see what's going to happen next. And on an unrelated point regarding this ending, I like how it shows the contrast within the bad girls, and how Kitty Cat is still spiteful and angry, whilst Doom and Pigtail show signs of redemption following their decent actions on the space station. I'm curious to see whether we'll see these girls again in the future, as their new dynamics could be interesting to watch. So yeah, I once again have to reiterate just how good this film is as a sequel. It follows up from everything that the original film set up, whilst also standing out with its own identity. And it leaves a more than substantial narrative impact on the series moving forward. It felt like a necessary next step in the franchise, and that's what's most important to me. It doesn't feel like a cash grab sequel, and instead feels like the natural next chapter, and I think that's great to see. But with all this discussion on the new elements of the film, I feel like I've neglected to discuss the aspects which made this series so great to begin with, and that's the main characters. They are the reason for why I love this franchise after all. And thankfully, they're all excellent here once again, and they feel like they've truly developed naturally from how they were in the original. However, this talk of the main characters does lead me on to one of my biggest problems with this film. I feel like some of the side characters don't have much to offer here that's particularly unique. I do really like the direction that they took Snake because, as I said before, him and Doom are peaked together and it gives us a different side to him in comparison to how gruff he was in the original. But Web, Shark and Piranha very much still act the same way that they do in the original. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing, as they do all have some funny moments within this film, and they are great characters to watch no matter the context, but I would have liked to have seen them expanded upon a little bit more within the sequel, as at the moment they do feel a bit stagnant as characters, and they really don't have the same narrative agency as Wolf and Diane. Again, they are fun, but I wish we got more from them. Although, whilst I'm talking about these characters, I have something important that I need to say. The Piranha space fart scene was hilarious to me, and I'm not going to deny it. Look, I know I said before that I'm not the biggest fan of fart jokes, but there are good ones, and to me, this was a good one. Why? Because it is so over the top and ridiculous that it actually loops around and becomes funny again. Piranha farting regularly is whatever. Piranha farting in a spacesuit and subsequently blowing it up and causing poor Snake to suffocate before then using a pen to poke a hole in the suit in order to blast back to the space station with the gas? That's funny to me because it's creative. Fart jokes are usually bad because they feel like cheap shots. This joke, however, had clear thought put behind it, and I therefore found the creativity of its absurd scenario to be funny as a result. So there, I don't care if I've lost all respect as a critic for saying this, it is how I feel. Plus, it was a beloved element of the books and was the sole reason for why the filmmakers sent the characters to space in the first place, so you weren't going to convince them to drop it even if you tried. But still, for as funny as the characters are in this film, I don't find their narrative roles all that special. Luckily, in spite of this, Wolf and Diane are both still excellent here, and they've developed their relationship from the first film in truly wonderful ways. First of all, I really like how Wolf didn't regress as a character, and instead remained as the same developed character that he ended the first film as. Whilst there was a brief moment of weakness from him where he questioned his new life, as I mentioned before, it didn't take away from his overall arc, as he still continued to be good. That's always nice to see, as regressed characters are so annoying. Although, Wolf's arc does feel different here, and it's a lot more tied to his relationship to Diane, and how much he cares for her and would do anything to protect her. He does another heist just to ensure her secret is protected, and he feels personally responsible when it's ultimately leaked. I find that idea quite powerful, and it works well alongside Diane's actions within this film, as she goes through a lot of effort to find out what's going on behind the scenes in order to clear the bad guys' names. These two characters deeply care for one another, and their willingness to do anything to protect them effectively shows off their strong bond. Plus, I just think that their relationship dynamic is really sweet to watch throughout. They've still got the same funny back and forth that they had from the first film, but now there's even more flirtatious chemistry, ooh. I mentioned before that I found myself shipping these two characters together after watching the first film, as I just thought that their chemistry was amazing. But this film really leaned into their flirtations, and it eventually got to the point that I was actively rooting for them to get together by the end of the film. I'm not much of a shipper, but I needed to see Wolf and Diane as a couple. And then we finally got to the ending of this film where Diane came out of the spaceship to save Wolf from Kitty Cat like the badass that she is, and that leads us on to this amazing moment. It took everything in me to not start cheering and clapping in the cinema when this kiss happened. Again, I'm not even a shipper, but it was just so satisfying to see these two characters kiss. It was built up well, it was a simple yet immensely satisfying payoff, and best of all, it was an uninterrupted, straight to the point kiss. When does that ever happen in animation? It's almost always interrupted for a joke. but the filmmakers knew how important this moment was for the characters, and so they left it as it was and didn't cockblock. They didn't force a joke in to break the romantic tension, and it wasn't dragged out in an annoying way. It was immediate and straight to the point and passionate and romantic, and I bloody loved it. But whilst this relationship is peak, the characters are still great on their own here, with Wolf being as charming and lovable as ever, and Diane still being the best character for me. In fact, when rewatching this film, I actually realised something. Diane is kinda like a female James Bond in a way. Think about it. She's got cool gadgets, she's got supreme fighting abilities, she's not opposed to breaking the rules every now and then, she's incredibly cool, pretty flirtatious, and she's really funny and suave, and she dresses immaculately well. Yeah, she's basically James Bond but gender flipped, and furry. That's just something that I thought about. Although, on the topic of Diane, another thing that I find interesting about this film is some of the deleted scenes with her. You see, in original scripts, Kitty Cat was supposed to be Diane's former crime partner, who she moved away from after turning to a life of good. The deleted scene which showed the pair's backstory was honestly really cool, and it had some interesting planned cinematography, and I think that it definitely would have given Kitty Cat's exposure plan a greater personal edge. It would have been really interesting to see, honestly. But I can equally understand why it was removed, as it would have taken a lot of focus away from the bad guys. The core of Diane's story within this film is her relationship with Wolf after all, and so this extra baggage with Kitty Cat would have gotten in the way. Plus, I still think it's equally effective to have Diane suffer at the paws of Kitty Cat, all for the purposes of convenience rather than a personal vendetta. It gives Kitty Cat's actions a special layer of coldness, as she's ruining someone she doesn't even know that well, rather than someone she personally hates. I do still like both storylines though. Whilst it would have been cool to see the Crime Sisters version of this film, the core emotional beats around Diane still landed for me here. And at the end of the day, her relationship with Wolf was way more important to me, and that stuff succeeded with flying colours. So yeah, to the surprise of no one, Diane's role within this film was fantastic, and I can't wait to see more from her in the future, either from a Bad Guys 3 or a solo movie with her, which I would pay so much money to watch. And speaking of the future of this franchise, let's briefly discuss that. Now, unfortunately, The Bad Guys 2 only just broke even at the box office, which is a real shame as I thought this film is excellent and deserved to be seen by more people, especially over the live-action How to Train Your Dragon remake that came out the same year. But hopefully, this mediocre box office return won't cause DreamWorks to backpedal on the franchise. Whilst it hasn't been confirmed or denied whether the third movie is coming, I'm personally going to hold out hope that we will get it. Based off of how things ended here, I feel like The Bad Guys 3 will be a really interesting story, and I really want to see it. The post-credits scene confirmed that Marmalade is an alien, and the Izglop setting and the fancy suits really seem to imply that the third movie could potentially become a Men in Black type story, and I think that would be really cool to see. I just hope that the film gets greenlit and the money isn't a problem, as there's clearly a story here that this team wants to tell, and I would hate it if they are prevented from telling it all because of box office. But I'm not a company man, I can't say what will happen. I just like to hope that DreamWorks has enough faith in this franchise artistically to keep it going. And if bloody Cocomelon ends up being used to fund it, then that's a sacrifice I'm willing to accept. But if this is the end, which I really hope is unlikely, then at least The Bad Guys 2 is a fantastic movie in its own right. In the grand scheme of DreamWorks sequels, it's not quite as peak as the likes of Shrek 2, or Kung Fu Panda 2, or Puss in Boots The Last Wish, but it's still excellent and better than the original film regardless, and I'd also argue that it's still better than every Disney sequel besides Zootopia 2, so that's certainly something. Also yes, after rewatching both films recently, I do in fact prefer Zootopia 2, but I still love both films, don't get me wrong. But going back to The Bad Guys, its plot is tighter and less cliché than the original films, its villain is better, and it's still gorgeously animated and full of amazing action. Admittedly, I do think that the first film is a little bit funnier, and it's got more of that crime movie sophistication that I love to see, but this film is still a brilliant piece of high spectacle entertainment which works as both an amazing sequel and an amazing film in its own right. And we get to see Diane Foxington kicking ass, so of course I love this film. It is my favourite piece of Bad Guys media by far. And with all of that said, let's finally wrap up this video. So overall, The Bad Guys is just a really fun franchise which I've developed a special fondness for. It's not perfect, the additional material is kinda whatever, and the films both have flaws and aren't quite top tier DreamWorks, but I still really love them a lot. They've got a lot of characters who I've grown to love over the years, and I enjoy vibing with them no matter the story. And this led to me enjoying things like the TV show to an extent, as it gave us an excuse to vibe with these characters. But the films are where my passion truly lies, and they are the stories that I constantly rewatch. They feel very unique due to their blend of sophisticated heist elements and cartoony silliness, and their presentation is also excellent with amazing, passionate, confident direction. These are films that I greatly enjoy watching, talking about, and hell, I even enjoy just thinking about them. They may not be absolute favourites of mine, but I love them nonetheless. And of course, they've got Diane Foxington, who stands as one of my favourite characters out there. All in all, I had a lot of fun making this video because I have a lot of fun with this franchise, and I hope that you all enjoyed listening to me talk about this stuff as well. And as I said in the start of the video, do let me know in the comments if you also want me to review the books. As for some other DreamWorks franchises that I could talk about, I admittedly haven't got any others that I want to fully complete like this, especially since I've already talked about most of the important films in depth in my Best Animated Feature nominees ranking, and they're the stuff which most people care to hear my opinions on. But I nonetheless want to remind you all of the promise that I made within this video. Yes, I will watch and review All Hail King Julian when and if I reach 10,000 subscribers. So if you want to hear me talk about it, you know what to do. Is this a tacky way to encourage more subscribers? Yes, but I don't care. Although to be fair, if you made it to this point in the video, you clearly care about what it is that I have to say, so you may as well subscribe if you haven't already. But until I reach that eventual milestone, I'll be back with more videos on different random topics which I hope you'll still enjoy watching. Stay tuned for next April as the Titanic ranking will be coming then. But until next time, take care and thanks for watching. Goodbye everyone!